What happens when a society built entirely on the idea of absolute unity, just begins to fracture from within?
That is the big question.
Right. And maybe the more terrifying question is, how loud does a whisper have to get before it completely shatters a system?
Well, to figure that out today, we aren't looking at government propaganda or, activist wish lists.
No, we're doing a deep dive into the raw structural data from the streets.
Exactly. We're using the source material like a seismograph for a society on the brink. And I want to be really clear up front. We are dissecting intense ideological divides here. People fiercely for and fiercely against the Cuban government.
But we aren't taking any political sides.
Right, absolutely not. We are purely providing an objective analysis of the original source material. We're looking at the anatomy of a structural failure.
We're tracing the blueprint of a fracture. And to do that, I want you, the listener, to picture this reality for a second.
It's a heavy picture.
It is. You are sitting in your home and it's pitch black. The refrigerator isn't humming. The fan isn't spinning.
Because the energy shortages have wiped out the power grid. Again.
Right. So there's this thick, heavy atmosphere, just silent tensions hanging in the dark.
And when the sun finally does come up, that quiet fear from the night before just mixes with this rising, palpable anger.
Yeah, because families are staring at soaring food prices that they simply cannot afford.
It's a squeeze. You've got small businesses caught in an absolute vice grip, suffocating under what is essentially a mathematical impossibility to survive.
This is Cuba's current reality right now.
Yeah. And, the macroeconomics of a struggling nation, they're really just theoretical concepts until you have to figure out how to buy dinner.
So true.
To understand how a nation reaches a breaking point, you can't start with political speeches. You have to start in the grocery aisles.
Or the small storefronts.
Exactly, because that is where the pressure is the most acute.
So our mission for this deep dive is to trace this slow-burning fuse. We're going to follow the structural tension from the tightened pressure of external embargoes straight through to the daily strain on ordinary people.
And watch how those hidden cracks spread beneath the surface.
Find a digital voice and ultimately erupt into protests. Let's start with that daily reality for the working class. The sources describe it as a brutal two-front war.
A two-front war is the perfect way to phrase it.
On one side, you have the external pressures, right? The long-standing U.S. embargo.
Right, which heavily restricts international supply chains.
But then on the home front, they are battling internal restrictive government regulations.
And the true devastation happens right where those two forces intersect. I mean, imagine you're running a small neighborhood bakery.
Okay, a bakery.
Because of that external U.S. embargo, you can barely find imported flour or yeast.
And when you do find it,
it's heavily marked up on the informal market. It's incredibly expensive.
But you still have to sell the bread.
Right, but here's where the internal state regulations kick in. They mandate strict price controls.
Oh, wow.
The government dictates the absolute maximum price you are legally allowed to charge for a loaf of bread.
So wait, you are forced to buy your supplies at these exorbitant black market rates.
But you have to sell the final product at a subsidized state-mandated fraction of that cost.
You are legally required to operate at a loss.
Exactly. You are bleeding money by design. And add to that the fact that you're trying to bake this bread while the power cuts out for 12 hours a day.
Because of the severe national energy shortages, that's just an exhausting, endless loop of survival.
It really is. The older working-class generation is simply depleted by the daily logistics of just staying alive.
But the sources highlight that the younger generation is experiencing something entirely different, don't they?
Yeah, they aren't just tired. They are fundamentally disillusioned.
They're looking at a system that offers a crushing lack of economic opportunity and highly restricted personal freedoms.
It's a specific structural failure to integrate human capital.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you have this incredibly well-educated demographic, doctors, engineers, teachers, and they realize that their official state salaries literally cannot purchase basic cooking oil. They don't see any viable path forward within the current economic model.
It's like being trapped in a waiting room, Yeah. And the door to the future is just locked.
That's a great analogy.
Or like inheriting a massive, outdated mainframe computer. The older generation remembers when that computer was state-of-the-art, when it provided stability.
But the youth are looking at this giant machine, realizing It can't run any modern software.
Right, it's constantly crashing, and the state absolutely refuses to give them the administrative password to even try and update it.
They're locked out of their own future.
But I do have to push back a little here. Based on the historical context in our sources,
Sure, go ahead.
are these young people actually capable of driving true institutional change? Or is this just, a temporary wave of youthful discontent?
Like the standard rebellion that flares up in your 20s.
Yeah, exactly. The kind that eventually burns itself out when you just get tired and need to pay rent.
Well, that debate is actually central to the analysis in the sources. Youthful discontent is a feature of almost every society on Earth.
Sure, teenagers and 20-somethings are always mad at the system.
Right, but in most systems, there are built-in pressure valves to absorb and redirect that energy.
Like what?
Like democratic voting or economic mobility, the ability to start a disruptive business, or even just shifting cultural norms. Those all act as release mechanisms.
But in Cuba,
In a highly centralized, controlled system, those pressure valves simply do not exist.
because the economic stagnation is so deep.
Exactly. And the avenues for legal reform are incredibly narrow. So the discontent doesn't dissipate. It crystallizes.
Wow. It hardens.
Whether they possess the actual organizational capacity to dismantle the institution is an open question. But the energy itself is not a passing phase.
It's a permanent shift in expectation.
Absolutely.
So if the youth can't channel that crystallized frustration into the streets or their careers, that energy doesn't just vanish.
No, it has to go somewhere.
It bleeds into the home. And this brings us to a really crucial escalation in our deep dive.
The dinner table divide.
Right. The economic starvation and this generational frustration are turning private sanctuaries into ideological battlegrounds.
The demographic clashes detailed in the sociological data pit, staunch supporters of the government against those desperate for reform.
And the most unsettling detail from the sources is that this conflict is not happening across state lines.
No, or even between rival neighborhoods.
It is happening within the exact same families, across the dinner table.
Those silent tensions in the pitch-black homes we talked about earlier, this is where they are realized.
You have a father who vividly remembers the early promises of the revolution, the universal healthcare rollouts, the mass literacy initiatives.
Because those were real achievements for that generation.
Exactly. But he's sitting across from his daughter, who only knows the current scarcity.
She wants to leave the country because her medical degree can't buy groceries.
The psychological toll of that micro-level fracture has to be immense.
It's staggering. You have two entirely different realities attempting to coexist under the exact same roof.
Because the older generation views the hardships as a necessary sacrifice against external imperialism.
Right, they maintain that deep ideological loyalty. But the younger generation views the exact same hardships as proof of systemic incompetence.
Politics in this environment isn't an abstract debate you can just turn off. It dictates whether or not you eat that day.
And that brings up a massive structural problem for the government.
Right, because if a socialist model relies fundamentally on the unified voice of the collective,
The idea that the people and the state are one cohesive entity.
yeah, how can the government possibly maintain social stability when the foundational unit of society, the family, is fundamentally fractured?
They can't. And that is precisely why the ideological fracture within the family is so incredibly dangerous to the state apparatus.
Because the state can't station a guard in every single kitchen.
Historically, centralized control relies heavily on informal social cohesion.
The family doing the policing for them.
Exactly. The family unit is supposed to be the place where state messaging is reinforced, where the younger generation is taught the values of the revolution.
So when the family unit fractures, the state loses its most crucial, cost-free mechanism of social control.
If the official government narrative is being actively dismantled and mocked in the living room every single night, the foundation of that unified collective voice is already gone.
And at that point, stability becomes merely an illusion.
An illusion maintained by the threat of force, rather than any genuine social consensus.
An illusion maintained by force. But, if the illusion of consensus is shattering in a million separate, isolated living rooms, how do those fragmented families realize they aren't alone?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because for decades, isolation has been a primary tool of control. If the state controls the newspapers, the television stations, the physical streets.
These dinner table arguments should technically stay trapped in the house. And they would have a decade ago.
Yeah.
But the shift from centralized information to decentralized digital networks has completely altered the chemistry of this societal tension.
The arguments have found a conduit to the rest of the country and the world.
Social media is acting as the ultimate digital accelerant.
The sources detail how citizens are using digital platforms to bypass the state apparatus entirely.
It's incredible to see the data on this. They are spreading real-time information, sharing radical new ideas, and connecting a historically isolated population with the outside world.
The magnitude of this paradigm shift really can't be overstated.
No, it can't. When the flow of information is entirely centralized, the state dictates reality.
If a protest happens in one city, the state media simply doesn't report it.
And the rest of the country assumes everything is totally fine.
But now citizens are armed with smartphones.
When someone in one province records a video of a protest and uploads it, that barrier of isolation shatters instantly.
People watching on their screens realize that their private anger is actually a shared national experience.
And the sources highlight the specific mechanics of how this works through the actions of student organizers.
Right, these are the highly educated young people trapped in that stalled economy we talked about.
They aren't just passively scrolling through feeds.
No, when the state attempts to block internet access during times of unrest, these students are utilizing VPNs, virtual private networks, to tunnel through the digital blockades.
They're setting up encrypted chat groups to organize demonstrations.
Mapping out protest routes, warning each other about police movements. They're actively creating a parallel, shared reality that directly contradicts the official state broadcast.
It is a profound shift in agency. By building parallel networks of communication, they have effectively decentralized the narrative.
The state can no longer contain a localized spark before it catches fire digitally.
Exactly.
But I have to play the skeptic here again to really deepen the debate.
Go for it.
We have watched tech utopian digital movements rise and fall all over the globe over the last 10 years.
The Arab Spring, for example.
Right. So is a network of smartphones truly a potent force capable of changing an entrenched political institution?
That's a fair question.
Because social media seems fantastic at spiking societal tension, getting people angry, getting bodies into the public square.
But it rarely offers any real mechanism for governing.
Exactly. An angry, viral hashtag doesn't draft a new constitution or stabilize a currency.
Well, the limitation you were pointing out is actually the subject of fierce debate within the source material itself.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Digital activism is an incredible tool for deconstruction.
Yeah.
It excels at pointing out exactly what is broken, mobilizing outrage, and coordinating temporary action.
It accelerates the fracture of the old system.
Right. But its constructive power is notoriously weak.
Because algorithms reward outrage.
Exactly. Social media inherently rewards emotional outrage and polarization, not nuanced, long-term governance.
So it can rapidly unite a diverse population against a common enemy.
In this case, the systemic failures of the state. But it almost always fails to unite those same people behind a cohesive, actionable political alternative once the initial protest ends.
It's a catalyst for disruption, not a blueprint for a new society.
Beautifully put.
So bringing this all together, we have a state losing its informal social control at the dinner table.
Yeah.
An economy caught in a mathematical gridlock that crushes the working class.
Right.
And an angry, disillusioned youth armed with decentralized communication. Where does this convergence leave the institution itself?
We have reached the macro impact, the climax of the tension.
All these elements are combining like a storm to push the entire society to the absolute brink.
The central question raised by the sociological data is whether these compounding structural cracks can actually collapse a system that has survived for over 6 decades.
And the sources project 3 distinct paths forward for Cuba's long-term future, right? Based on how similar centralized systems historically resolve.
Yes, 3 distinct paths.
The first path is the most severe: complete political collapse.
In that scenario, the sheer weight of the economic squeeze, the generational disconnect, and the speed of digital organization simply overwhelm the state.
They just lose the logistical and military capacity to maintain order.
The contradictions become too vast to manage. The state apparatus fractures internally, and the current system fundamentally buckles.
But total collapse is the most chaotic, unpredictable scenario. I have to assume that the people currently holding power are acutely aware of this threat.
Oh, they definitely are.
And they're actively trying to avoid it, which logically leads to the second path: meaningful internal reform.
Where the power structure recognizes that the foundation is cracking and chooses to initiate deep, systemic changes themselves.
What would that even look like?
Meaningful internal reform would require the regime to fundamentally alter the socialist model.
Like opening up the economy.
Yeah, significantly opening up the economy to free market dynamics, allowing private enterprises to operate without those price controls we talked about.
Or maybe allowing broader political participation.
The goal would be to relieve the pressure and save the core of the institution by evolving it.
But I mean, deep reform almost always threatens the very people holding the reins.
Historically, yes.
The instinct of an entrenched power structure is rarely to reinvent itself and give up control.
No, the instinct is usually to give away the absolute minimum required to get people off the streets.
Which brings us to the third path. The regime maintains the institution by offering only limited, calculated concessions.
This is the strategy of pacification.
Just giving enough ground to relieve the immediate boiling point.
Right. They might loosen a few specific regulations on small businesses, allow a slight increase in foreign investment, or divert emergency funds to temporarily stabilize the power grid in restless neighborhoods.
But keeping the core authoritarian structure and one-party rule entirely intact.
The objective is to fracture the protest movement by satisfying the least committed participants.
But I have to challenge that based on what we've discussed. Can limited concessions really patch up a foundation that is fundamentally cracking at the family level?
It's a huge gamble.
I mean, if a daughter completely rejects her father's state-aligned ideology at the dinner table because she has zero faith in her future, throwing a tiny economic lifeline to the neighborhood bakery doesn't fix that relationship.
No, it doesn't.
It feels like trying to fix a crumbling concrete foundation with a piece of duct tape.
Well, the mechanics of state survival dictate that limited concessions only work when the underlying grievance is superficial or temporary.
Like protesting a specific tax law.
Exactly. If you repeal the tax, the movement dissolves. But the data here details systemic structural exhaustion.
The fracture is in the family unit.
It's generational.
Yeah.
And it's amplified by a digital network that the state cannot fully silence.
In that environment, limited concessions might buy the regime a few months or even a few years.
But they do not heal the underlying crack. They simply paint over it.
So the core debate among analysts is whether the Cuban state has the resources, either economic capital or ideological goodwill left in the tank, to offer a concession significant enough to actually matter.
And when that duct tape eventually fails, the pressure hasn't gone away. It has just found a new crack.
And you are right back to facing the inevitability of total collapse or total reform.
Studying this, whether it's Cuba or any heavily centralized society under extreme pressure, is a masterclass in understanding the fragility of social contracts everywhere.
It really is.
It serves as a stark reminder of how quickly a supposedly unified, impenetrable system can unravel when the basic needs, the economic hopes, and the voices of its people are persistently stifled.
The social fabric is far more delicate than the state projects. We've watched this narrative unfold today from the ground up.
From the very bottom to the top.
We started with the tightening economic grip, those invisible barriers of embargoes intersecting with paralyzing state controls to suffocate daily life.
We saw how that relentless pressure forced its way into the private sanctuaries of the home.
Turning families against each other and shattering the state's informal social control.
And we traced how those private, isolated fractures were weaponized by a disillusioned youth.
Using digital networks to turn a whisper into a national roar. And now we see an entire society pushed to its absolute breaking point, with its future hanging entirely in the balance.
Which brings us to the final, unavoidable question, the ultimate unknown that the data simply cannot predict.
What happens next if everything gives way?
Yeah.
If the current system does fracture, and the state's enforced singular voice disappears overnight, what fills the void?
That's the real fear.
Does the collapse of absolute control leave behind a harmonious democratic chorus ready to rebuild a nation? Or does it merely create a chaotic, desperate vacuum where the loudest, most extreme voices rush in to seize control in the dark? Something for you to mull over on your own. Thanks for joining our deep dive today. Until next time.